Imagine being judged, not for who you are, but just for what you look like. That's what happens to so many young people because of racial profiling, and it's exactly what happened to Jaden Thompson in today's story. Get ready for a journey about courage, fighting for what's right, and how one person can make a real difference. We'll see how a simple teenager, facing unfair treatment, takes on a whole system. Before we dive in, shout out to everyone watching from the US, the UK, Canada, and everywhere around the world. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. And if you are new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this all unfolds. For 18-year-old Jaden Thompson, walking home from school should have been simple. Headphones in, backpack slung over one shoulder, just another Tuesday afternoon in Willow Creek. Willow Creek was one of those towns people called picturesque. Big houses, green lawns, quiet streets. But for Jaden, it wasn't always so peaceful. He lived with his mom in a small apartment on the edge of Willow Creek. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. The wealthier part of town, with the big houses, that was where his high school was. So every day he walked through those leafy streets. Most of the time people didn't really notice him. They were busy with their own lives, their errands, their perfect suburban days. But then there were the other times. The times when he felt eyes on him. The kind of stares that lingered a little too long. The kind that didn't feel friendly. It usually happened when police cars drove by. Slowing down just a little, the officers, inside glancing over, their eyes following him as he walked. Sometimes they'd drive past, no problem. Other times they'd circle back. Jaden tried to ignore it. He'd keep his head down, maybe pull his hoodie up even if it wasn't cold. He knew the drill. Don't make eye contact, don't look suspicious, just keep walking. But it was hard to ignore when it happened almost every single day. One time, just last month, an officer actually stopped him. "Hey kid," the officer had called out, rolling down his window. Jaden froze. He hadn't been doing anything, just walking. "Come here a sec." Jaden slowly walked to the police car, his heart pounding. "Yes, officer?" he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's your name? Where you headed?" The officer's tone wasn't exactly friendly, wasn't exactly mean, just official. Like Jaden was already in trouble for something. Jaden told him his name, explained he was walking home from school. The officer just stared at him, looking, him up and down. Jaden felt his face get hot, felt his hands start to sweat. He just wanted to disappear. "You live around here?" the officer finally asked, after what felt like forever. Yeah, just over on Oak Street." Jaden gave the address of his apartment building. The officer raised an eyebrow like he didn't believe him. "Oak Street, huh? Don't usually see kids like you around here." Kids like you. Jaden knew what he meant. He was the only black kid he could see on these streets most days. "Just going home, officer," Jaden repeated, trying to keep his voice steady. The officer finally nodded, but still didn't look convinced. "All right, just keep it moving. And stay out of trouble." He rolled up his window and drove off. Jaden stood there for a moment, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He was shaken, embarrassed. But this was normal. This was just walking while black in Willow Creek. He started walking again, faster this time, wanting to get home, wanting to feel safe in his own apartment. But even at home, the feeling lingered. Like he was always being watched, always judged. Like he didn't quite belong in Willow Creek, even though he'd lived there most of his life. He just wanted it to stop. He just wanted to walk home without feeling like he was doing something wrong just by existing. But he didn't know how to make that happen. Not yet. The next time, it wasn't just a slow drive-by or a few questions. It was worse. Much worse. It was a Saturday. Jaden was meeting his friend Marcus at the Willow Creek Park. They were going to shoot some hoops, maybe grab a burger after. Just a normal weekend plan. Jaden was walking through the nicer part of town again, heading towards the park entrance. He had his basketball in a bag, his usual hoodie on because it was a little breezy, but he felt good. It was Saturday. No school, just hanging out with his friend. Suddenly, a police car pulled up ahead of him, lights flashing. Not sirens blaring, but definitely getting his attention. Jaden stopped, confused. He looked around. Was there some kind of accident? No. The car was pulling right up to him. Two officers got out. One was the same officer who'd stopped him last month, the one who'd said, "Don't usually see kids like you around here." Jaden's stomach dropped. "Jaden Thompson?" the officer asked, stepping closer. Jaden nodded slowly. "Yes, officer?" He couldn't understand what was happening. He hadn't done anything. "We need to talk to you." The officer's voice was firm. No room for argument. "About what?" Jaden asked, trying to keep his voice steady, but his heart was already starting to race. "There's been a report of suspicious activity in the neighborhood, matching your description." "Suspicious activity?" Jaden just blinked, totally lost. "Suspicious activity? What kind?" The officer didn't answer directly. "Just hang on a second." He spoke into his radio, saying Jaden's name and location. The other officer was just standing there, arms crossed, watching Jaden like he was about to run. Run where? He hadn't. Done anything wrong? Then things moved fast. Too fast. "You're going to have to come with us," the first officer said, stepping even closer. "Come with you? Why? I didn't do anything," Jaden protested, his voice getting louder now, fear turning into anger. He could feel other people walking by were starting to stare. This was so humiliating. "Just calm down, son," the officer said, reaching for his arm. "We just need to clear a few things up downtown." "Clear things up? What things? Tell me what I did." Jaden pulled his arm away, taking a step back. He felt trapped, cornered. "Don't resist, kid. Just makes it worse." The officer's tone hardened. The other officer moved in too. "I'm not resisting. I just want to know why you're arresting me." Arresting? Had he just said arresting? Jaden's mind spun. Arrested for walking to the park? "We said there's a report," the officer repeated, not explaining anything else. Suddenly they were grabbing his arms, pulling them behind his back. The handcuffs were cold and tight on his wrists. "This isn't right. I didn't do anything. I'm just going to the park," Jaden yelled, panic rising in his chest. He looked around, desperately hoping someone, anyone, would see this, would understand this was wrong. But people just hurried past, avoiding eye contact. They shoved him into the back of the police car. The door slammed shut. Jaden was alone, trapped in the back seat, looking out the window as they drove away. His basketball bag was still lying on the sidewalk where he'd dropped it. Downtown, at the police station, they put him in a small, cold room. They read him his rights, but it all sounded like mumbled words, like it didn't really matter. They asked him questions, accusatory questions, about a possible attempted break-in in the neighborhood. Jaden couldn't believe it. Attempted break-in? He hadn't even been near anyone's house. He was walking to the park. He told them again and again, but they didn't listen. They kept asking the same questions, their eyes hard and disbelieving. Hours later, after his mom finally got to the station, frantic and upset, they released him. "No charges," they said. "Just a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding? He'd been arrested, handcuffed, put in a cell, for nothing. Walking out of the police station with his mom. The sky felt darker, the air colder. He looked back at the building, a heavy feeling settling in his chest. It wasn't just unfair. It was wrong. Deeply, terribly wrong. That night Jaden didn't sleep. He kept replaying it all in his head. The flashing lights, the cold metal of the handcuffs, the feeling of being accused of something he hadn't done. He wasn't just scared anymore. He was angry, and he knew, deep down, that this couldn't just be a misunderstanding. This was about the color of his skin, and he was done being silent about it. Something had to change, and he was going to be part of making that change happen. Jaden's mom, Maria Thompson, was a force of nature when she needed to be. Small in stature but with a backbone of steel. When she'd arrived at the police station and seen Jaden looking shaken and pale, something inside her had snapped. She'd listened calmly to the police officer's explanation about a misunderstanding, but her eyes told them she wasn't buying it for a second. Once they were home, Maria didn't start by yelling or comforting too much. She did what she always did when things got tough. She got practical. First, she made Jaden a big plate of his favorite mac and cheese. "Eat something, baby," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You need to keep your strength up." While he ate, mostly, in silence, she sat across from him watching him. She saw the anger in his eyes, mixed with a kind of hurt she hadn't seen before. When he was done eating, she spoke. "Jaden," she started, leaning forward, "that wasn't right. What happened today? It wasn't just a mistake. It was because of, well, you know why." Jaden nodded, picking at the last bit of cheese on his plate. "Because I'm black," he mumbled, not meeting her eyes. Maria reached across the table and took his hand. "Yes, baby. Because you're black. And that's not okay. It's not right. And we're not going to let it just go away." Jaden looked up at her then, some of the heaviness in his eyes lifting slightly. "What do you mean, Mama?" "I mean we're going to do something about it," Maria said, her voice gaining strength. "We're not going to just pretend it didn't happen. This isn't just a misunderstanding. This is about how they treat us, how they treat you." She stood up and started pacing the small living room, her mind already racing. "First thing, we need to talk to someone who knows about these things. Someone who can help us understand our rights." "Like who?" Jaden asked, still feeling a bit numb. "Like a lawyer," Maria said decisively. "A civil rights lawyer. Someone who fights for people when the police are wrong." Jaden hadn't even thought about lawyers or lawsuits. It all seemed so big, so official. "Mom, we can't afford a lawyer. You know that." Maria stopped, pacing, and looked at him, a determined glint in her eye. "We'll figure it out, Jaden. We always do. There are people who help for free, or for low cost. We'll find someone." And Maria, true to her word, started making calls the very next day. She called local community centers, churches, and even the NUAACP branch in the next town over. She explained what had happened to Jaden, her voice tight with anger and worry. It took a few calls and a lot of explaining, but finally, she got a lead. Someone at the NAACP gave her the name of a lawyer, Ms. Evelyn Reed, who specialized in civil rights cases, especially cases against police misconduct. They said Ms. Reed was known for being tough and for really caring about her clients. Maria didn't hesitate. She called Ms. Reed's office right away. She explained everything again, her voice getting stronger as she told the story of Jaden's wrongful arrest. She didn't hold back the anger, or the fear, or the deep sense of injustice she felt. Ms. Reed listened patiently, asking questions, taking notes. When Maria was finished, there was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then Ms. Reed spoke, her voice calm and clear. "Ms. Thompson, what happened to your son is unacceptable. It sounds like a clear case of racial profiling. I can't promise anything without looking into it further, but I think we need to talk. Can you and Jaden come to my office sometime this week?" Maria's heart leaped. Finally, someone who was listening. Someone who might actually be able to help. "Yes, Ms. Reed," she said, her voice filled with a hope she hadn't felt since that police car pulled up beside Jaden on Saturday. "Yes, we can. Thank you." As she hung up the phone, Maria turned to Jaden, who had been listening quietly. She smiled, a real, genuine smile for the first time in days. See, baby? I told you we'd figure it out. We have an appointment with a lawyer, someone who's going to help us fight back. Jaden looked at his mom, really looked at her, and saw the fire in her eyes, the determination in her face. And, for the first time since the arrest, a little bit of hope sparked in him too. Maybe, just maybe, things could actually change. And maybe he and his mom could be the ones to help make it happen. Ms. Evelyn Reed's office wasn't what Jaden expected. He'd imagined fancy law offices from TV shows, all glass and steel. But Ms. Reed's office was in an older building in a less flashy part of town. It was cozy, though, with warm colors, bookshelves lining the walls, and plants everywhere. It felt welcoming. Ms. Reed herself was also not what Jaden expected. He thought lawyers were supposed to be sharp and cold. Ms. Reed was sharp, all right, but her eyes were warm, and she had a kind smile. She was a black woman, and somehow that made a difference. Jaden felt like she would really understand. Jaden, Maria, thank you for coming in, Ms. Reed said, gesturing them to sit in comfortable chairs facing her desk. I've reviewed the notes from our phone call, and I want to hear everything in your own words. Start from the beginning, Jaden. Tell me about what happened on Saturday. Jaden, with Maria's encouraging hand on his shoulder, recounted everything, from walking to the park, to the police car pulling up, the accusations, the handcuffs, the interrogation, and finally being released. He described the fear, the humiliation, the anger. He told her about the earlier stops too, the constant feeling of being watched. Ms. Reed listened intently, nodding occasionally, asking clarifying questions. She didn't interrupt much, letting Jaden tell his story completely. Maria added details here and there, especially about how upset Jaden had been afterward and her own feelings of helplessness and outrage. When they were finished, Ms. Reed leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. Thank you both for sharing all of this. I know it's not easy to relive. She paused. Based on what you've told me, and based on what I know about the Willow Creek Police Department, this certainly sounds like a case of racial profiling. It's illegal, it's damaging, and it's something we need to address. Maria sat forward, her voice eager. So, you think you can help us? Ms. Reed nodded. I believe we have grounds to file a civil rights lawsuit against the Willow Creek Police Department. We can argue that Jaden's Fourth Amendment rights, protection against unreasonable seizure, and 14th Amendment rights, equal protection under the law, were violated. Jaden felt a mix of relief and nervousness. Lawsuit? That sounded huge. A lawsuit? Against the whole police department? Ms. Reed smiled gently. It sounds big, I know, and it will be work. But yes, that's the way we can fight back, legally, for what's right. To not just get justice for you, Jaden, but to try and make sure this doesn't happen to other young people in Willow Creek. What do we need to do? Maria asked, practical as always. First, we need to build a strong case, Ms. Reed explained. That means gathering evidence. Do you have anything documented from Saturday? Anything at all? Maria thought for a moment. Well, the police gave us a release form when they let Jaden go. It's pretty basic, just says released without charges and the date and time. She pulled it out of her purse and handed it to Ms. Reed. Ms. Reed examined it. This is something. It shows you were indeed arrested and detained, but we need more. Did anyone see what happened in the park? Were there any witnesses? Jaden thought back to Saturday. He remembered people walking by, looking. I think so. People were around, but I don't know who they were. I was just focused on the police. Okay, Ms. Reed said, making notes. We can try to find witnesses. We can also request police records, the incident report, the officer's body camera footage if they had any, the dispatch logs. We'll have to formally request these, and they may resist, but we will push. Body cameras? Jaden asked. Do police here have those? Some departments do, Some don't fully use them. We'll find out if Willow Creek is one of them. If they do, that footage could be crucial, Ms. Reed explained. Also, Jaden, thinking back to the other times you were stopped, can you remember dates, times, locations, even approximate ones? Any details at all? Jaden started thinking harder. He tried to recall each time he'd felt those eyes, seen those police cars slow down, remembered that one stop last month. It was all a blur of moments, but he tried to piece it together. Maybe a couple of weeks before school ended. In May? It was near the corner of Elm and Main. And once, it was last fall, on Willow Creek Road, near the library. He trailed off, realizing how vague it all sounded. That's okay, Ms. Reed reassured him. Anything you remember is helpful. We'll start documenting all of these incidents. The more we can show this is a pattern, not just an isolated event, the stronger our case will be. She looked at Maria. Maria, we also need to think about community support. Have you talked to anyone else in your neighborhood, your church, your community about what happened? Not really, Maria admitted. I was so focused on getting Jaden out and then finding you. I haven't talked to many people yet. It's time to start, Ms. Reed said firmly. We need to let people know what happened. Because chances are, Jaden isn't the only young black person in Willow Creek this has happened to. We need to find others, share stories, build a community of support. Strength in numbers. That's how we can make real change. Jaden and Maria looked at each other. It was starting to feel real now. This wasn't just about one arrest anymore. It was about a pattern, a problem, a whole community. And they were going to fight for change, together, with Ms. Reed by their side, and hopefully with their community behind them too. The road ahead looked long and maybe difficult, but for the first time in a long time, Jaden felt a spark of real hope. He wasn't alone in this, and he wasn't going to stay silent anymore. Maria took Ms. Reed's words to heart. That week, while Jaden tried to get back into his normal routine, school, basketball practice, homework, even though everything felt different now, Maria started talking. She began with her closest neighbors in their apartment building, then reached out to people at her church, the local Baptist church where she'd been a member for years. At first it was hard to talk about. Embarrassment mixed with anger still felt raw. But Maria found that once she started, the words came pouring out. She told them about Jaden, about the arrest, about the racial profiling she believed he was facing. She didn't accuse the whole police department, but she spoke of the unfairness, the feeling of being targeted simply because of his race. To her surprise, people listened, really listened. And then, one by one, others started sharing their own stories. A neighbor talked about her son being stopped while driving for no reason. Another church member spoke of her nephew being questioned aggressively while walking through a wealthy neighborhood where he was visiting a friend. The stories were different, but the theme was the same. Young black people in Willow Creek being treated differently, unfairly, by the police. The more Maria talked, the more she realized Ms. Reed was right. Jaden wasn't alone. This was a pattern. It was a problem woven into the fabric of Willow Creek, hidden under the surface of those picturesque streets. With the support of her church community, Maria organized a meeting at the church basement one evening. She just put up flyers around the neighborhood, simple signs saying, "Community Meeting, Addressing Police Practices in Willow Creek." She didn't know if anyone would come, but they did. The basement room slowly filled up with people. Black, families, young people, older folks, all with a shared concern, a shared experience, or a shared outrage. Maria, a little nervous, stood up at the front of the room and spoke, her voice shaking slightly at first, then growing stronger as she went on. She told Jaden's story again, her voice filled with emotion, but also with resolve. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then a murmur went through the crowd, turning into louder conversations, nods of agreement, sighs of recognition. People started sharing their own experiences, adding to the picture Maria had painted. The meeting went on for hours, fueled by shared anger, but also a growing sense of community and purpose. Ms. Reed attended the meeting too. She listened, took notes, and when it was her turn to speak, she outlined the legal options, explained the lawsuit, and answered questions. She emphasized the need for unity, for collecting more stories, for making their voices heard. The meeting was a turning point. It was no longer just about Jaden and Maria. It was about a community standing up. And they decided they wouldn't just talk amongst themselves. They needed to take it public. Ms. Reed suggested reaching out to the local newspaper, the Willow Creek Gazette. At first, Maria was hesitant. Putting their story in the paper felt risky, but Ms. Reed explained the importance of media attention, of letting the whole town, not just their community, know what was happening. They contacted the Gazette. To their surprise, the editor was interested. A young reporter, Sarah Jenkins, was assigned to the story. Sarah interviewed Jaden and Maria, listened to accounts from the community meeting, and started digging into police statistics, looking for any patterns in arrest data. A few days later, the Willow Creek Gazette ran a front-page story. Are Willow Creek police profiling our youth? The article detailed Jaden's arrest, highlighted community concerns, and quoted Ms. Reed about the potential lawsuit. It was balanced, quoting a police spokesperson denying any racial profiling, but the message was clear. There was a serious issue in Willow Creek that needed to be addressed. The article sparked immediate reactions. Within the Black community, it was a confirmation of what they already knew. Among some white residents, there was surprise, even shock, and for some, outright denial or defensiveness. The police department issued a longer statement, again denying racial profiling and emphasizing their commitment to community safety. But the seed was planted. The issue was out in the open, and the community, energized by the meeting and the newspaper article, was ready to take the next step. Ms. Reed suggested organizing a town hall meeting, a public forum where residents could directly address the police department and town officials, demanding answers and demanding change. The idea caught fire. They would bring the issue right to the heart of Willow Creek, in front of everyone. The fight was on, and it was going public. The Willow Creek town hall was packed. Every seat in the auditorium was taken, and people were standing along the walls, spilling into the hallway. The air crackled with tension, anticipation, and a nervous energy that vibrated through the room. This wasn't just another local council meeting. It was a showdown. David was facing Goliath, right here in Willow Creek. On one side, filling the front rows, sat the concerned residents, mostly Black families, students, and community leaders. They were ordinary people, teachers, nurses, shop owners, parents, but tonight they were united and determined. Maria and Jaden Thompson sat near the front, flanked by Ms. Evelyn Reed. On the other side of the room, on the raised stage, sat the Goliaths, Chief Miller of the Willow Creek Police Department, Mayor Thompson, no relation to Maria and Jaden, and a few stony-faced town council members. They looked official, powerful, and distinctly uncomfortable. Mayor Thompson started the meeting with forced pleasantries, attempting to set a civil tone. Welcome everyone to tonight's town hall. We are here to discuss community relations and address recent concerns. His voice sounded a bit strained, not his usual confident politician tone. But the pleasantries didn't last long. Maria was the first to speak from the floor, microphone in hand, her voice clear and strong despite the nerves she must have felt. Mr. Mayor, Chief Miller, we are not here to just discuss concerns. We are here because there is a serious problem in Willow Creek. My son, Jaden Thompson, was wrongly arrested simply because he is Black, and he is not alone. She gestured to the crowded room. Look around you. These are your residents. These are our stories. She then recounted Jaden's arrest, her voice unwavering as she described the humiliation and injustice. When Maria finished, a wave of applause and supportive shouts erupted from the community side of the room. Chief Miller shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mayor Thompson's smile tightened. Ms. Reed then took the microphone, her lawyerly presence commanding attention. Chief Miller, in light of Jaden's case and the numerous similar stories we've heard, can you explain the Willow Creek Police Department's policies regarding racial profiling? And can you assure us that these policies are effectively preventing discriminatory practices? Chief Miller stepped to the microphone on the stage. He cleared his throat, his voice measured and defensive. First, let me state clearly, the Willow Creek Police Department does not condone racial profiling. We train our officers to act professionally and without bias. In the case of Mr. Thompson, there was a report of suspicious activity, and officers were responding to that report. It appears there was a misunderstanding. He repeated the phrase, misunderstanding, as if hoping it would make it true. The crowd erupted in murmurs of disbelief and anger. Misunderstanding? Someone yelled from the back. Arrested and handcuffed for misunderstanding? Chief Miller tried to regain control. We take all complaints seriously. There is an internal review process in place. But people weren't letting him off the hook with general statements. One by one, residents stepped to the microphone, sharing their own experiences, their family members' encounters with police. A young woman described being pulled over repeatedly for broken taillights that were perfectly fine. A father talked about his teenage son being stopped and frisked while walking home from basketball practice, just like Jaden. An elderly woman spoke of her fear every time her grandsons went out, knowing they were targets just because of their skin color. Each story chipped away at the official narrative, revealing the raw reality of racial profiling in Willow Creek. The anger in the room was palpable, but it was also a righteous anger, fueled by years of silent frustration. For the first time, these voices were being heard, not just within their community, but in a public forum, directed at the very people who were supposed to protect and serve them. Throughout the meeting, Jaden sat quietly beside his mother, watching and listening. He saw the pain and anger in the faces of his neighbors, but also the strength and courage. He realized he wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was part of something bigger, a movement rising from the grassroots of Willow Creek. Ms. Reed strategically guided the questioning, keeping the focus on policy and accountability. She pressed Chief Miller for specifics. Chief, what concrete steps will the department take to ensure officers are trained to avoid implicit bias? Will you commit to releasing data on police stops and arrests, broken down by race, so the community can assess whether profiling is occurring? Will you consider civilian oversight of the police department? Chief Miller, visibly flustered, evaded direct answers. Mayor Thompson jumped in to defend the police, praising their hard work and dedication. But his words sounded hollow in the face of the personal stories being shared. The town hall meeting stretched late into the night. No easy answers were given, no immediate policy changes promised. But something fundamental had shifted. The silence was broken. The issue was exposed, and the community had found its voice. David might not have defeated Goliath in one night, but the first stone had been thrown, and the fight had truly begun. Willow Creek would never be quite the same again. The town hall meeting was a victory in spirit, but the reality was, little changed immediately in Willow Creek. The police department issued another statement, reiterating their anti-profiling stance, but offering no concrete policy changes. Mayor Thompson gave vague promises of further dialogue, but set no timeline. The Willow Creek Gazette continued to cover the story, but with less front-page prominence. Other local media outlets mostly ignored it, portraying it as just a community disagreement. Public opinion in Willow Creek was divided, and often along racial lines. Some white residents expressed sympathy and support for the black community, but many others dismissed the accusations of racial profiling, defending the police, and accusing the complainants of being troublemakers or playing the race card. Jaden and Maria felt the backlash in subtle and not-so-subtle ways. At school, some white students avoided Jaden, while others stared or whispered. Maria noticed some shopkeepers in town were less friendly, less welcoming than before. Anonymous online comments on the Gazette's website were often overtly racist and hostile. The lawsuit, filed by Ms. Reed on behalf of Jaden Thompson against the Willow Creek Police Department, moved slowly through the legal system. The police department's lawyers filed motions to dismiss, delaying tactics that frustrated Ms. Reed and tested Jaden and Maria's patience. "This is going to be a marathon, not a sprint," Ms. Reed cautioned them. "They will try to wear us down, to make us give up. We have to be prepared for that." And the pressure did mount. Financially, things were tight. Maria had taken time off work to attend meetings, to help organize, to support Jaden. Ms. Reed was working pro bono, but there were still court filing fees, investigation costs, and other expenses that added up. The community had started a small legal defense fund, but donations were slow. Emotionally, it was draining. Jaden, already dealing with the trauma of the arrest and the constant microaggressions of daily life, now felt the weight of being the face of this lawsuit. He sometimes wished he could just go back to being invisible, to just walking home without being noticed, without being targeted. Doubt crept in. Was it really worth it? Was anything actually going to change? One particularly difficult day, after a frustrating meeting with Ms. Reed where they learned about yet another legal delay, Jaden slumped onto the couch in their small apartment, feeling defeated. "Mama," he said quietly, "maybe we should just drop it. Maybe it's too hard. Maybe nothing will change anyway." Maria, who had been trying to stay strong, felt a pang of fear at his words. She sat down beside him, taking his hand. "Jaden, baby, I know it's hard. It is really, really hard. And sometimes it feels like we're not making any progress. But we can't give up now. We've come too far." "But what if we lose?" Jaden asked, his voice low. "What if we go through all this and nothing changes? What if it just makes things worse?" Maria held his hand tighter. "Even if we lose the lawsuit, baby, we haven't lost our voice. We've woken people up in Willow Creek. We've started a conversation that needed to happen. We've built a community that wasn't there before. That's not nothing, Jaden. That's something really important." She looked into his eyes, willing him to believe her, to believe in himself. "And we might win, baby. We might actually win in court. Ms. Reed is good. We have the truth on our side. And even if it takes longer than we want, even if it's harder than we imagined, we have to keep fighting. For you, for me, for all those people in that town hall, for all the young black kids in Willow Creek who deserve to walk down the street without being afraid." Jaden looked at his mama's face, her eyes filled with a fierce love and an unyielding determination. And something shifted in him again. The doubt didn't vanish completely, but it was pushed back, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting with his mama, with his community, for something bigger than just a lawsuit. He was fighting for change, and they weren't going to back down, no matter how hard it got. The fight was far from over, but they were still in it, together. Just when Jaden and Maria were starting to feel worn down by the slow grind of the legal battle, things began to shift. Slowly at first, then with increasing momentum, the tide started to turn in Willow Creek. It began with Sarah Jenkins, the reporter from the Willow Creek Gazette. She hadn't dropped the story after the initial front-page article. Instead, she kept digging, attending community meetings, interviewing more residents, and meticulously reviewing public records. She unearthed data showing that black residents in Willow Creek were indeed disproportionately stopped and arrested for minor offenses compared to their white counterparts. The numbers were stark, undeniable. Sarah wrote a follow-up article, This time focusing on the data. By the numbers, racial disparities in Willow Creek police stops, the headline declared. The article laid out the facts and figures in clear, unemotional terms, letting the data speak for itself. This article had a different kind of impact. It wasn't just about personal stories anymore. It was about cold, hard evidence. The data resonated especially with those in Willow Creek who had been skeptical or dismissive of the racial profiling accusations. People who might have ignored personal anecdotes couldn't ignore the statistics. Conversations started to change. Questions began to be asked in different corners of town. At coffee shops, in PTA meetings, among book clubs and neighborhood associations. Is this really happening in Willow Creek? Are we really treating people differently based on race? The discomfort was growing. The local NAACP chapter, energized by the community meetings and the media coverage, stepped up their activism. They organized peaceful protests outside the police station, marches through downtown Willow Creek, and voter registration drives focused on local elections, emphasizing police accountability as a key issue. Young people, inspired by Jaden's courage, got involved, creating social media campaigns, using hashtags like Justice for Jaden and Willow Creek Deserves Better, amplifying the message beyond the town limits. Ms. Reed, meanwhile, kept pushing the legal case forward. She filed a motion to compel the Willow Creek Police Department to release body camera footage and internal investigation reports related to Jaden's arrest and similar incidents. Initially, the police department resisted, claiming privacy concerns and ongoing investigations. But Ms. Reed fought back, arguing for transparency and public accountability. And surprisingly, the judge ruled in her favor. The order to release the body camera footage was a major turning point. When clips from the body cameras of the officers involved in Jaden's arrest were finally released to Ms. Reed, and then, with careful consideration and community agreement, to the media, they painted a damning picture. The footage showed the officers approaching Jaden abruptly, making assumptions based on his appearance and escalating the situation quickly, without reasonable cause. It showed Jaden's clear distress, his repeated statements that he hadn't done anything wrong, dismissed and ignored by the officers. The footage corroborated Jaden's story and undermined the police department's misunderstanding narrative completely. News channels outside Willow Creek picked up the story. Suddenly, Willow Creek, the picturesque town, was in the national spotlight, but for all the wrong reasons. Racial profiling scandal in small-town America, headlines declared. Body cam footage exposes police misconduct. The public outcry was immediate and intense. Politicians at the state level began to comment, calling for investigations and reforms in Willow Creek. Community leaders from across the country reached out to Maria and Jaden, offering support and solidarity. Donations to the legal defense fund surged. Within Willow Creek itself, the shift was palpable. People who had been silent or neutral started to speak out in support of Jaden and against racial profiling. White residents joined the protests, attended community meetings, and wrote letters to the editor of the Gazette, expressing shame and demanding change. Local businesses, feeling the pressure, started putting up signs in their windows. "We stand with Jaden. End racial profiling in Willow Creek." The pressure was now squarely on the Willow Creek Police Department and the town officials. Chief Miller, once defiant, looked increasingly beleaguered in press conferences. Mayor Thompson, sensing the shifting winds, began to strike a different tone, speaking of the need for community healing and reforms within the police department. Jaden and Maria, watching the news reports and seeing the outpouring of support, felt a wave of relief and vindication wash over them. The fight was still far from over, but they had won a crucial battle, the battle for public opinion. The truth was out. People were listening. And change, real change, finally felt possible. Goliath was still standing, but David's stone had found its mark. The mounting public pressure forced Willow Creek town officials to the negotiation table. Mayor Thompson, facing increasing calls for his resignation and the threat of state intervention, contacted Ms. Reed directly. He proposed a meeting to discuss resolution, hinting at a willingness to settle the lawsuit and consider policy changes. Ms. Reed, consulting closely with Jaden, Maria, and community leaders, agreed to negotiate, but with clear conditions and demands. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about systemic change, about preventing future injustice, about making Willow Creek a truly fair place for everyone, regardless of race. The negotiations were tense and lengthy, held over several weeks, in Ms. Reed's office, away from the public glare. Representing Willow Creek were Mayor Thompson, a town council representative, the town attorney, and, somewhat reluctantly, Chief Miller. Ms. Reed, of course, was there for Jaden and Maria, along with a delegation of community leaders chosen at a large community meeting. Ms. Reed laid out their demands from the start, clear and unyielding. 1. Public apology. A formal public apology from the mayor and police chief to Jaden Thompson and the black community of Willow Creek for the wrongful arrest and the history of racial profiling. 2. Policy reform. A complete overhaul of the Willow Creek Police Department's policies and procedures regarding stops, searches, and arrests, explicitly prohibiting racial profiling. This included mandatory implicit bias training for all officers, ongoing community oversight of police practices, and a clear system for civilian complaints and accountability. 3. Transparency and data. Commitment to collecting and publicly reporting data on all police stops and arrests, broken down by race, ethnicity, and neighborhood, to track progress and ensure accountability. 4. Community investment. A substantial investment in community-led initiatives focused on youth development, educational equity, and economic opportunity in Willow Creek's underserved black communities. This was not framed as hush money, but as a necessary step towards addressing the systemic inequalities that fueled racial disparities in the first place. Initially, the Willow Creek representatives balked at some of the demands, particularly the public apology and community investment. Chief Miller remained defensive, still downplaying the issue of racial profiling, but Mayor Thompson, feeling the political heat, was more pragmatic. Negotiations stalled, heated up, stalled again. Ms. Reed and the community leaders held firm, refusing to back down on their core demands. They knew this was a crucial moment, a chance to leverage public pressure and moral authority to achieve meaningful change. Outside the negotiating room, the community kept up the pressure. Protests continued, letters poured into the mayor's office, and local businesses remained steadfast in their public support for Jaden and the movement for justice. Sarah Jenkins and the Willow Creek Gazette kept the spotlight on the negotiations, reporting on each development, keeping the public informed and engaged. Slowly, gradually, the Willow Creek side began to concede. The body camera footage and the data disparities were too damning, the public outcry too loud, the legal threat too real. Mayor Thompson, calculating the political cost of continued resistance, started pushing for a settlement. After weeks of intense negotiation, a tentative agreement was reached. It wasn't everything the community had initially hoped for, but it was substantial, a real step forward. Willow Creek agreed to all 4 core demands, albeit with some compromises on the details and timelines. The agreement included a public town hall meeting where Mayor Thompson and Chief Miller would issue a formal apology, a commitment to revising police policies with community input and oversight within 6 months, a pledge to collect and publish police stop data quarterly, and the allocation of funds for community programs over 3 years with community representatives involved in deciding how the money would be used. The lawsuit would be settled, with a modest financial compensation for Jaden for the wrongful arrest, but the larger victory was the systemic reforms and the promise of a more just Willow Creek. When the tentative agreement was announced, there was a mix of relief, cautious optimism, and a sense of hard-won progress within the Black community. It wasn't the end of the struggle, but it was a beginning. A chance to build a different kind of Willow Creek, one where young people like Jaden could walk down the street without fear, where justice wasn't just a word, but a reality. The David versus Goliath fight in Willow Creek was not fully won, but a significant battle had been claimed, opening the door for lasting change. The final town hall meeting was different from the first. The tension was still there, but it was mixed with a sense of possibility. This time, the atmosphere wasn't about accusations and anger, but about acknowledgement and moving forward. Mayor Thompson stood at the podium on the stage, his face somber. He spoke to the packed auditorium, his voice more sincere than before. "People of Willow Creek, I stand before you tonight to acknowledge a painful truth. We have not always lived up to our ideals of fairness and justice for all. Recent events and the voices of our community have made it clear that racial profiling has been a reality in our town, perpetrated by our police department. For this, on behalf of the town of Willow Creek, and especially to Jaden Thompson and our Black community, I offer a sincere and public apology." Heads nodded in the room. Maria, sitting in the front row with Jaden and Ms. Reed, felt a lump in her throat. It wasn't just words. It felt like a real acknowledgement of their pain, their struggle. Chief Miller followed the mayor, his apology less effusive, but still significant. "As chief of police, I take responsibility for ensuring fair and equitable policing for every resident of Willow Creek. We have fallen short. We are committed to doing better. We will implement new policies, new training, and new accountability, measures to ensure that racial profiling has no place in our department." After the apologies, Ms. Reed spoke, her tone firm but hopeful. "This agreement is a start, not an end. Words are important, but actions are what truly matter. We will be watching, we will be involved, to make sure these commitments are kept and that real change happens in Willow Creek." She introduced the newly formed Community Police Oversight Board, composed of residents, including community leaders who had been at the forefront of the movement. The board would have real teeth, reviewing police policies, analyzing stop data and handling civilian complaints, ensuring transparency and accountability. In the months that followed, Willow Creek began the slow, sometimes bumpy process of reform. New police policies were drafted, with community input. Officers underwent hours of implicit bias training. The police department started diligently collecting and publishing stop and arrest data quarterly. The Community Police Oversight Board met regularly, scrutinizing the data, reviewing complaints, and engaging in dialogue with police leadership. It wasn't a perfect transformation. Mistrust and skepticism lingered. Some officers resisted the changes, some residents remained unconvinced, but a corner had been turned. Conversations about race and policing that had been taboo were now open and ongoing. Slowly, cautiously, relationships between the police and the Black community began to mend, to rebuild. Jaden, in the midst of it all, became a symbol of change in Willow Creek. He finished high school, spoke at community events, and became a youth advocate for racial justice. He was offered college scholarships, inspired by his courage and leadership. He chose to stay local, attending the state university, determined to continue working for change in Willow Creek and beyond. 1 year later, Sarah Jenkins wrote a follow-up article in the Willow Creek Gazette. 1 year after the town hall, has Willow Creek changed? The article presented data showing a significant drop in racial disparities in police stops and arrests. It interviewed police officers, community leaders, and residents, painting a nuanced picture of progress and ongoing challenges. The conclusion was cautiously optimistic. Willow Creek was not a post-racial utopia, but it was moving in the right direction, towards becoming a more just and equitable community, thanks to the courage of a teenager, the resolve of his mother, and the power of a community united for change. As for Jaden, he was walking home from his university classes one afternoon, headphones in, backpack slung over his shoulder, through those same leafy streets of Willow Creek. A police car drove by, slowing down. Jaden tensed, his old instincts kicking in. But then the officer inside just gave him a nod, a casual, almost friendly nod, and drove on. Jaden kept walking, but this time he didn't lower his head. He straightened his back, met the officer's eye briefly, and nodded back. It was a small thing, a very small thing. But in Willow Creek, it felt like a revolution. He smiled, a real smile, and walked on, knowing that things were different now. Not perfect, but different. And that difference was worth fighting for, every step of the way. Did Jaden's story move you? Did it make you think about courage and community? We hope it did. These kinds of stories about fighting for justice and making your voice heard, are so important. If you felt inspired by Jaden and Maria's fight, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Mystic Tales. We bring you stories like this every time because we believe in sharing tales of strength, resilience, and the amazing things people can do when they stand together for what's right. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story. Have a wonderful day.